This is the Asia Trade. I'm Avril Hong in Singapore. Your top stories this hour. President Trump heading for South Korea ahead of his crucial meeting with Xi Jinping. He'll speak later today at the APEC CEO Summit. We'll be live in Gyeongju. Asian stocks poised for gains with a tech rally sending Wall Street to fresh highs ahead of key earnings reports. Microsoft finalizing a deal with OpenAI for a 27% stake. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang dismisses concerns about an AI bubble as he announces a flurry of new partnerships.
AI has now become good enough because of reasoning capability, research capabilities, its ability to think. It's now generating tokens and now generating intelligence that's worth paying for.
And the AI boom helps SK Hynix post record profits for the third quarter as chip prices and demand ratchet higher. And of course, we have gotten those SK Hynix earnings, and we are seeing that indication of what we will see in the session. And pre-markets, we are pointing to quite a bit of upside, but let's unpack what we got from these SK Hynix numbers. After earnings, we know that they reported 62% jump in profit. So this underscores how AI infrastructure build-out globally is helping chip prices, helping demand as well. Now, in terms of the operating profit, we already knew that a record was expected, and it has exceeded expectations, 11.4 trillion won, so about $8 billion for the September quarter. And this is compared with the average analyst estimate for 11.2 trillion won. We are seeing a bit of risk off, or perhaps markets watching out for what we actually will get from the U.S. and Korea today. And this is despite on U.S. stocks reaching those all-time highs. And this was really driven by the big tech names and against the backdrop of some of these mega caps that are reporting this week. But Shery, it's really the focus that's going to be on Korea for the moment with Trump there.
Welcome to Gyeongju. This is a city just 2 hours on train from Seoul, and we are now at a very historic, culturally significant site with many UNESCO places, and we are expecting thousands of visitors just this week because of the start of APEC. And remember, such a consequential meeting. We are expecting President Trump to meet President Xi Jinping, also South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, who's the host, of course. We are expecting hundreds of business leaders, including Nvidia's Jensen Huang, Citigroup Jane Fraser, not to mention JD.com's Sandy Xu. Heads of states also coming. Not surprising, we have tons of security. More than 18,000 police officers have been deployed on site. We do have SWAT units, Coast Guard personnel. And Korea is the hope to push for a Gyeongju declaration. But of course, Avril, you know how challenging the geopolitical and trade backdrop has been.
Absolutely, Shery. But at least we also have some form of cooperation or positive tone coming out from Japan following Trump's visit there. And maybe that gives us some sign of optimism of what can be expected when it comes to the contours of the investment pledge between the U.S. and Japan. I think that is also worth noting, even with Trump headed to Korea, because we know now some of the high-profile companies that will be committed to that investment vehicle for Japan companies investing into the U.S. So we have the likes of SoftBank, Toshiba, and in terms of the areas of investment, these include energy, AI, critical minerals. We have the top Japanese trade negotiator, Akazawa, saying that these projects will be worth up to $400 billion. And of course, this investment vehicle had been touted to be worth $550 billion. And you're just seeing those pictures as well of both the Japanese leader and Trump on the USS George Washington. Of course, this is the aircraft carrier where they signaled tighter security cooperation. And based on these comments that have come out from Trump, you do get the sense that the friendship that the U.S. president had with Sanae Takaichi's mentor, Abe, that is going to continue as well. Have a listen.
This woman is a winner. So, you know, we've become very close friends all of a sudden because their stock market today and our stock market today hit an all-time high that means we're doing something right.
President Trump in South Korea today for a meeting with counterpart Lee Jae-myung this morning as the leaders seek to hammer out the details of a $350 billion investment pledge. He'll have a packed agenda while in Korea, with a lunch with CEOs also expected today. But, of course, one of the key diplomatic events of the year is a meeting between Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday. Joining us now is Eduardo Pedrosa, Executive Director at the APEC Secretariat. Eduardo, really good to have you here and meet you in person in Gyeongju.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So much on the agenda, as I mentioned, especially given that Korea does want a Gyeongju declaration. But we've seen when President Trump has been in one of these meetings that those declarations are pretty hard. Do you expect one?
I do. Korea has been extremely successful, despite all the difficulties, in getting joint ministerial statements throughout the year. So we've counted about 12 this year. So we're looking for another successful joint ministerial statement and also one from the leaders' declaration. In spite of the difficulties we face, especially on the trade front, trade ministers agreed to a joint statement earlier this May.
It's been interesting that we have been focusing so much on these bilateral meetings. Even here at APEC, a multilateral setting, the focus is very much on President Trump and President Xi Jinping. How relevant are these multilateral groupings these days?
Well, the first is that these groups provide a platform for the bilateral deals to actually take place. As you've mentioned, President Xi and President Trump have been supposed to meet all year long. Finally, it's come right here in Gyeongju at an APEC meeting.
Do you expect something significant to come out from these bilaterals?
Well, we hope so. The recent ASEAN meetings came up with some very successful deals, so hopefully we'll see some here as well.
You noted earlier this year that the trade rule book is actually dated, but what sort of consensus can we expect, especially when you have this setting, multilateral, where so many countries are involved in trying to get their say in whatever comes out?
Well, one of the problems with the rule book is it just hasn't moved on since the 1990s. So what we can do here is to sort of take an incubator approach to think through what do we need to do in this ever-changing world, especially with new technologies like artificial intelligence. So that's what we're looking to be delivered here in these meetings.
What the United States and many other countries want vis-a-vis China, for example, is a fair playing ground, right? When it comes to setting the agenda for APEC 2026, if we do not get some significant progress out of these conversations between the U.S. and China, could that have a meaningful impact on how all of these other countries interact as well?
I think we're just going to keep our eyes on the future. There may be difficulties and bumps along the road, but APEC's very much a forward-looking organization. So we'll take what we can, think through cooperation, and where common ground is. And that's very much the APEC way.
And it's very important for the private sector to actually have a say in how you shape up the framework of what the economic future should look like, right? At the APEC CEO Summit, what are you expecting business leaders to focus on?
I think businesses today are looking for a certain amount of certainty about the environment in which they're operating. Investments have been in a way held off. We're seeing volatility, we're seeing uncertainty. But one of the things groups like APEC can do is try to unbundle some of the complexity. As we've said earlier, trade deals are on the road, so these deals help to navigate our way through this environment.
You mentioned other sectors such as artificial intelligence as also a core focus of these conversations. We have seen an incredible rally on anything AI related. Right. What sort of discussions can we expect at APEC that could help shape the future of how this technology evolves?
Well, APEC it's not a rule-making body, but the way we look at it is, as a way for us to move forward and bring benefits to our people. So that's really something that APEC takes very differently from other organizations. It's, how do we innovate? How do we create an environment which leads to better innovations and facilitates the development of technologies that are better in sectors like health, like education, and so on.
Korea has made AI one of its core items on this year's APEC agenda. How significant is Asia in the development of tech?
Well, Asia, as I'm sure you know, has really been one of the growth centers. It's moving very quickly. So what we're looking for is trying to get a framework, if you like, for how can we work together on AI issues. We don't want to spend so much money on redundant investments. It's working together to make sure that we find our own advantages in this growing ecosystem.
Especially when you need to sort of establish the baseline for AI ethics, not to mention security.
That's right. So AI ethics, AI security, for us this is really about sort of having a people-centric, human-centric approach. So we'll look at safety with respect to making sure that privacy is respected and people can find a way to trust AI, given that we all don't know what's inside the black box.
Can Asia-Pacific lead when it comes to these changes?
I think everyone in the Asia-Pacific would like to work together to unbundle what it is and see through what the black boxes are. So it's about cooperation. People don't actually know and say one part of Asia compared to another. So that's where thinking through interoperability is incredibly important.
Lots of conversations to be had, but how challenging was it to actually organize this event? Because we know that South Korea went through a transition of government. Gyeongju was decided on by the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration. We know the logistics have been difficult, the lack of hotels. We had a very difficult time trying to get into the venue this morning. Will things get better from here? And what are still the opportunities to be had?
Well, definitely, it was difficult to get into the conference center, but this does happen almost every APEC meeting. Now, what we can think about is, what is it that we want from these meetings? Why Gyeongju? I mean, it is the sort of historical capital of the Shilla Empire. So in a way, there's sort of some symmetry that's being created between the past and the future.
What sort of cooperation have you had with South Korea in bringing this event to fruition, especially, as I mentioned, since we saw this change in government?
There's actually been a surprising amount of stability. There were worries at the beginning of the year whether changes would make it difficult for the meetings to take place. But the government in Korea has been extremely cooperative and found ways to make all of this happen in spite of the changes that we've seen.
When it comes to the next round of conversations that we're expecting during the next APEC, what could be some of the takeaways from this summit?
For this summit, it's going to build the foundations for future work. APEC sort of works incrementally, so working from one issue to another, say from the environment, and then this year we've been looking at AI. I don't know what will happen next year. China is the next host, so it'll be interesting to see what China has as its focus next year.
The geopolitical and trade tensions, for example, how much do they impact setting up these conversations?
Well, they're definitely in the background, but for APEC members, it's really about doing things that are in their self-interest. So how do you make growth work for the people? And that's something that APEC is quite unusual in the way that we all work together, but it's not a trade-off mechanism, but a way to find better growth and better jobs for people in the region.
Eduardo, Pedrosa, really good to have you with us. Thank you so much for having us here at APEC Gyeongju as well, Executive Director at the APEC Secretariat. And coming up on Bloomberg Television, we do have more from the APEC CEO Summit. Later, we'll speak with Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce as the world awaits President Trump's expected meeting with Xi Jinping.
Yeah, Shery. In the meantime, let's take a look at how SK Hynix is indicated in the pre-market session, because we, of course, have been seeing it reporting these record quarterly profits. And this is knocking things out of the park because there were already some indications that it would be a good set of numbers. So this is exceeding those expectations. But it is also worth noting, even though we're pointing higher when trading begins in South Korea, that this is also a stock that declined as much much as 6% in the session a day ago, amid reports of a price war with Samsung Electronics, which is, of course, a rival when it comes to high bandwidth memory. And there were some indications that they could be cutting prices on some of these chips by 30%. So what is that going to mean for overall demand for SK Hynix and the bottom line? And this is, of course, coming against the backdrop of the Nvidia CEO, Jensen Huang, talking about cooperation with some of these South Korean chip names. We will get to that in just a bit, but take a look at what we are seeing from the Wall Street session, all-time highs, as I mentioned earlier, and this is really being driven by those Fed rate cut bets solidifying. And then you have Jensen Huang himself dismissing concerns about an AI bubble developing. And when it comes to the data, yes, we are seeing some slippage in U.S. consumer confidence, but perhaps also helping to address concerns about the lack of data because of the U.S. government shutdown. We do have the likes of the ADP indicating that the reporting will be on the weekly basis on top of those monthly data points that they do provide to us. We'll have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Now, Nvidia has announced a flurry of new partnerships, not just with South Korean companies. It's also taking a $1 billion equity stake in Nokia and plans to supply the telecom company with AI-powered computers for wireless networks. The CEOs of both companies spoke with us about their new partnership.
For national security reasons, for economic reasons, our industry should be built on American technology, and for the very first time, we can do that. We have a brand new product line that takes advantage of computing, accelerated computing, and AI, and we have a great partner to help us do it with, Nokia.
The market reaction kind of speaks for itself. There was a time when Nokia was already looking to America. You've been in the role since April, but may I start by asking you what role the administration played in bringing you both together, if this is indeed a strategic priority?
Well, I don't think there was anything specific that the administration did, other than they've created the environment to support innovation. I mean, Jensen's talked about manufacturing, but it's also about R&D and innovation and technology leadership. And if you think about where this world is going and all those incredible devices that are going to be built on Nvidia platforms, robotics, autonomous vehicles, augmented reality, virtual reality, we need a different kind of network in the future. And that's what we realized. And that's why we wanted to forge this partnership, so that we're building a network leveraging AI for AI services. And that's really the big change here.
And the technology is flowing both ways. I mean, what is it that you will be able to do with Nokia, Jensen, that you weren't able to do on your own?
Well, first of all, Nokia is in all of the world's base stations. And this AirScale platform of Nokia is in millions of base stations around the world. If our computers are not inside that base station, it doesn't help. It's no different than NVIDIA's tech computing platforms not inside a car, it doesn't help. And so the first thing is we need a partner to get us into the world's space stations. We also, remember, we're bringing AI to radio networks, AI to RAN, so that we can make wireless tech communications a lot more efficient. Second, we're bringing AI for the radio, meaning on top of these radio networks and these telecommunication network, we're going to be able to provide AI services, which is going to be able to make it easier for us to do robotics and autonomous vehicles and industrial automation and reach all of the different places around the world. That's kind of hard to do with Wi-Fi. Cellular reads everything. And so we now have this fabric that we can deploy AI computing services on top of it. It's going to be completely revolutionary.
In your world and in your market, Huawei is an influential player, not just in Europe, I think also about the Middle East and Africa. How important is the relationship with Nvidia to be able to counter, what Huawei does in those markets?
Yeah, look, I think for us, one of the principles I've had with my team since coming in has been do what we can do that no one else can do, and that is AirScale, what we do with AnyRAN software, the software that runs on it that we're going to be putting on the NVIDIA ARC platform. Do what we can do well and partner with the best everywhere else. And this is a clear opportunity to partner with the best. And by the way, that's where America and the Western world succeeds, because we don't necessarily have one company doing everything like Huawei. We succeed because we partner aggressively. And if you watch GTT today, it was hard to not find it obvious that you're partnering with everybody. But that's the advantage, is this partnership. So we do what we do best. We let Nvidia do what they do best, and ultimately our customers win, and ultimately for America, I think America will win because there'll be more innovation faster here.
Nobody knows telecommunications better than Nokia. They've been at it for a long time. They're all over the world. And between our two partnerships, we now have wireless telecommunications, we have AI, and we have accelerated computing, all in this partnership.
The CEOs of Nvidia and Nokia speaking to Bloomberg Tech anchor Ed Ludlow. OpenAI is giving longtime backer Microsoft a 27% ownership stake as part of a restructuring plan that clears the way for OpenAI to become a fully profit-driven business. Bloomberg's tech reporter Brody Ford joins us from Los Angeles. Brody, so how is this partnership structured?
So this current AI age we're in was really ushered in by OpenAI signing this huge deal with Microsoft, years ago. But over time, there's been some trouble in paradise, and OpenAI has wanted to get computing power elsewhere, and Microsoft's been a little anxious about its ongoing access to OpenAI's models. And so what we saw today is that Microsoft will get access to OpenAI's models until 2032. It has, 7 years to build products on top of that, bolster its own internal efforts. And OpenAI no longer has to ask Microsoft permission when it wants to go and dance with other cloud providers. And really importantly, OpenAI is able to restructure from a nonprofit to a for-profit. I know a lot of these structures can be wonky. They're wonky for us too, but what it effectively means is a year or two out, we could see an OpenAI IPO.
Right. Brody, on top of that, does this also help address the concerns about what happens when OpenAI achieves AGI? Just very quickly, if you can.
Right. AGI, that idea of you hit intelligence artificially that's better than humans. The prior contract had this clause that once it was declared, model access could be snatched away from Microsoft. And obviously, if you're Microsoft, that's very scary. The restructure today addresses that, and when AGI comes, Microsoft keeps the models, at least for a couple of years.
Brody, thanks for the roundup. Thanks so much. Bloomberg's tech reporter Brody Ford. We have more hits on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Quick look at Asia futures after all-time highs on Wall Street, and we are seeing perhaps a bit of caution creeping into the session. But don't forget, we'll also be watching the tech names in South Korea. SK Hynix, record quarterly profits and indications that its chip slate is being sold out all the way into next year. Something to keep an eye on in the session. We'll have more ahead on the Asia trade as well, given the geopolitical backdrop. Explosions over Gaza after Israel orders military strikes, jeopardizing the U.S. brokered ceasefire. We'll have details on that next. This is Bloomberg.
Things are starting to ramp up here at the Gyeongju Arts Center, where the APEC CEO Summit will kick off. Avril, of course, we do have the opening ceremony in about an hour. Then after the APEC CEO Summit, we have the APEC Leaders Summit. We have so much on the agenda, especially with many bilateral meetings, which will be key. We are expecting President Trump to land this morning, then meet with President Lee Jae-myung. Of course, the contentious issue right now is finalizing the trade deal between the two countries, and we know that $350 billion billion investment pledge is a key concern at this point. I spoke to President Yi last week, and he said that they were still discussing major issues on that fund. When it comes to President Trump and President Xi Jinping, perhaps that could be a more positive meeting. We are expecting this lineup of diplomatic wins that officials from both sides may have prepared, including soybean purchases. That will happen on Thursday, so we're watching for that summit.
Absolutely. And I think some have already described the Trump-Yi meeting as an appetizer to the main course of the Trump-Xi meeting at this APEC event. And you just saw there as well the private sector involvement. Jensen Huang also set to speak at that event. So on top of what it means for perhaps soybean purchases from China to the U.S., the AI sector as well, and those investments coming from America into South Korean companies and vice versa.
Yeah, things are starting to ramp up right now. You can hear the music also starting to play. We are expecting all people to gather very shortly, but it's been very interesting to watch President Trump visit so many different countries across Asia. We are expecting him to land this morning here in South Korea, and how he deals with this multilateral setting, which we know is not one preferred for the president, will be key. But President Trump and President Xi Jinping discussing that trade deal, of course, is the key question, as you mentioned, Avril. And we know that China, on the one hand, has been trying to strengthen its own economy, perhaps that giving the country a little bit of leverage when it comes to those conversations. Beijing pledged to significantly boost domestic consumption over the next 5 years while keeping technology and manufacturing as top priorities. The move aims to reduce reliance on exports after trade tensions escalated sharply this year. Let's bring in our China correspondent, Min Lo in Hong Kong. Min, it looks like China is determined to tackle this deeply rooted problem in its economy.
Yes, and the Trump-Xi meeting and the trade war between U.S. and China really is a key backdrop here in which to interpret this document that lines out the 5-year plan for China, because a big part of it, President Xi said in a speech that was published on state media, was that China wants to really speed up strengthening its domestic economy to counter some of these external forces and uncertainties. So there are twin engines that they're focusing on now. One is tech self-reliance and the other is consumption. So when it comes to tech self-reliance, as you said, Avril, President Trump looking to sign that deal with South Korea, collaborating on areas like AI and the like. And China also is wanting to ramp up its own disruptive technologies, especially in core areas like chips, like advanced equipments, for example, and also in emerging pillars like new materials, new energy, and so on. But the other sector, consumption, this is a major focus as well. And China wants to lift the share of the GDP from the current 40% to, well, they want to lift that, but they didn't set a target. And that's one of the key criticisms, right, that it's lacking in some of the details. How forcefully is the government going to push this through? Currently, it stands at 40% of GDP, and it's far below the global average of around 56%. And also below the number that for most high-income countries is close to 60%. So it's a big challenge, especially considering that we have this deflationary streak, a very stubborn one that's been lasting about 3 years now.
So what specific measures is the government looking at to boost consumption?
So in this document that was issued by state media, there are a number of policy steps. One is to improve people's livelihood so that they have more money to spend. And a part of that is boosting employment, increasing or improving income distribution. How specifically is the government going to do that? That's still not so clear at this point. But other steps include increasing investments as well, boosting services, consumption, and also addressing that price competition that we've been talking about. The document talked about promoting healthy competition to ensure that it's based on high prices and high quality rather than that cutthroat competition that we're looking at. And again, some analysts are saying that the language here perhaps is not strong enough, suggesting that the government might be taking a mild approach here, perhaps discouraging investments into overcrowded sectors, but not necessarily closing down existing excess capacity. So again, a lot depends on the details, how exactly local governments are going to implement this blueprint. And again, this is just a proposal for now, and the final details will be approved and vetted and issued in March during the two sessions when the Legislative Council meets.
Min Min Lo, thank you so much, our Bloomberg China correspondent for us. Now, of course, when it comes to the tepid Chinese economy, that has been a factor dragging down the expectations of demand for commodities. And in terms of oil prices, the focus is also on Russia stockpiles, the situation in Gaza, oil for the moment holding steady after a 3-day drop. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered what he calls forceful strikes against Hamas, alleging attacks on Israeli soldiers in Gaza. Reports of tank fire and explosions have emerged from Gaza City, potentially putting the U.S. brokered ceasefire at risk. Bloomberg's Michael Heath has been following developments for us. So, Mike, we knew that the ceasefire could be quite fragile. What do we know about the latest break?
Yes, Avril, fragile is definitely the word. And, I mean, I guess the risk here is that we're starting to see the unravelling of it after about 2 weeks. At this stage, my sense is that's probably not the case. I mean, there's always going to be some toing and froing. And what's recently happened is, as you mentioned, there was this attack on Israeli soldiers near Rafah in Gaza. But at the same time, also, Hamas is due to transfer the bodies of hostages who died, who were either killed when they were abducted or died later. And Israel accuses Hamas of staging finding a hostage and then repatriating it when they had the body originally. So there's been a bit of build-up here. And as you mentioned, Israel has now responded. The question, I guess, is what happens from here? I mean, on the Arab side, on the US side, they're all very, very heavily invested in this. So it just depends really on how much pressure President Trump is prepared to exert. He seems to be fairly sympathetic to Israel's position in these particular cases, that it's going to have to respond if it comes under fire.
Yeah, President Trump busy on his Asia trip. We are expecting him this morning here in Gyeongju, South Korea. But what have we heard from other lawmakers on Capitol Hill and just the broader sentiment across Washington?
Yeah, Shery. I mean, Vice President Vance said that, look, the truce, the ceasefire is holding, that these sort of skirmishes are to be expected. And we've also had, a parade of pretty senior US officials coming down to Israel as well. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there, and part of the sense of that is that the Americans want to keep a very close eye on what's going on. They don't want to be misinformed. They want to be seen for themselves, and they want to try to keep Israel in line and on track as best as they can. And obviously, from the Arab side, that's exactly what they're trying to do with Hamas as well. I mean, there's just problems that Hamas is also, there's been cases of it trying to cracking down on rival factions and these sort of things. There's just a lot going on there, now that the general fighting has stopped. A lot of incidents, a lot of skirmishes. So the US position seems to be that this is going to happen, but, that the ceasefire will hold.
Bloomberg's Michael Heath there with the latest on that ceasefire in Gaza. Subscribers can watch us live and see our past interviews on our interactive TV function, TV Go. You can also dive into any of the securities or Bloomberg functions that we talk about and become part of the conversation by sending us instant messages. Check it out at TV Go.
Take a look at the stock price of SK Hynix. Of course, this is a company that tends to be overbought into earnings. We are seeing pre-market indications of a recovery from yesterday's declines. Of course, SK Hynix has reported a 62% jump in third quarter profit as the global AI infrastructure build-out ratchets up chip prices and demand. The profit beat comes after the stock price was hit by rival Samsung, slashing its high bandwidth memory prices. Let's bring in Bloomberg Asia stocks reporter Yu Kyung Kyung Lee for us. So Yu Kyung, how good do these numbers look? Record profits, and what do they tell us about future demand as well?
Yeah, they're all really great questions. So I think market was expecting somewhat of a profit beat when it reports the third quarterly results. So the record profit is not as surprising, but it's definitely a blockbuster result. But what's really, I think, surprising and is a positive for SK Hynix is that the company has already sold out its entire chip lineup for year 2026. I think that's the latest, most bullish signs that the demand for the AI chips are really strong as global companies are hoovering up chips to build more data center and AI infrastructure. And I think now the question might move on to whether this SK Hynix shares, which have tripled over this year alone, how much upside would have. And I think that question comes down to whether this chip stock, which has been a memory cyclical stock so far, when this cycle is going to end. And we have this Nvidia's Jensen Huang saying that we're not in an AI bubble. So I think with today's results and with Nvidia's comments, investors may not worry about bubble too much, and they probably will enjoy the party.
Yu Kyung, in fact, we're hearing that Nvidia will also be investing in SK Hynix parent company SK Group, not to mention buying chips and supplying chips to other Korean companies. What do we know?
So this was reported overnight by my colleague, our colleague Yu-Lim Lee. It was an exclusive from Bloomberg, citing people familiar with the matter that Nvidia will be supplying some kind of AI chips to Hyundai Motor, Samsung Electronics, and SK Hynix parent group. Now this comes as South Korea hosts the APEC CEO Summit, which will also be have some of the global leaders, including Trump arriving this morning in South Korea, and President Lee Jae-myung expected to have some summits. So a lot of this AI news that we'll have to digest in the coming days. We are also hearing that United States Trump, U.S. President Trump will sign an AI deal with President Lee Jae-myung. We don't have as much details about that, but the AI is definitely going to grab a lot of headlines in coming days.
And we are seeing that really the driver of stock market performance as we see the Kospi topping 4K. Bloomberg Asia stocks reporter Yu Kyung Lee for us. Now we have more from the corporate front as well. Bloomberg has learned that Starbucks sees Boyu Capital as the frontrunner in its search for a partner in its China business. Sources say the private equity firm is the likeliest buyer after outbidding others, including Carlyle Group. A potential deal could value Starbucks' Chinese operations at more than $4 billion. Uber plans to build a fleet of 100,000 autonomous vehicles powered by Nvidia technology. Nvidia says the companies expect the expansion to start in 2027. The ambitious move could help bring down the cost of offering hailable robo-taxis to consumers. Stellantis will be among the first automakers to deliver Nvidia-powered robo-taxis to Uber. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
A lot of the noise and drama around private credit is, somehow that there's a whole bunch of risk that's hidden in the system because it's no longer in the banking system, and that's going to present some systemic exposure. I don't see it. At some point, if the credit cycle turns down, they'll have losses.
Okay.
And those investors will have lower returns or negative returns. But that's business.
Standard Chartered CEO Bill Winters at the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh. Bloomberg also spoke exclusively at the event with Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon. He downplayed growing concerns about systemic risks in the credit market and also discussed his outlook for the Fed.
The Fed, will cut rates tomorrow, and then we'll see. I know the consensus is you'll get another cut before the end of the year, but the policy rate has been higher. I think they're looking to move more toward neutral, and so we'll take a step in that direction. But I think the Fed always is an observer of what's going on in the real-time economy. The real-time economy can shift very quickly. At the moment, I would say the U.S. economy is in quite good shape, but I wouldn't jump forward. There are lots of forward prognostications about the path of interest rates. I would just highlight mostly I'd look at the moment. You can project forward, but just because there's a forward projection, it doesn't mean that's where we'll wind up.
There's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
There's a lot of uncertainty.
Another thing that needs to be watched carefully is perhaps, the credit situation. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Tricolor, First Brands. One of your peers in the industry described there being potentially cockroaches around. I don't know if there's a certain insect reference that you want to pick up on, but ultimately, how worried are you about some of these individual idiosyncratic credit incidents actually becoming systemic?
I think this is a great opportunity for people that are in credit businesses and are deploying significant capital as lenders in credit businesses to look at their procedures, their practices, their underwriting standards, look through their portfolio, and really take a strong evaluation of where they are.
Yeah.
You can't separate the fact that we've been in a very, very long, easy credit cycle, one of the longest I've seen in my career, without a real credit pullback, without an economic environment that's really put an enormous amount of pressure on credit. And in that context, credit spreads are historically tight.
Yeah.
And I know at some point there will be a credit cycle. It will probably come at a period of time when the economy slows more acutely, or there's some sort of a macro event that changes confidence we have in growth and the trajectory of the economy. And when that happens, given the velocity of lending activity, there will be losses in credit, and those losses will be felt across the system. But that's different than a systemic crisis. And I don't see anything in the context of a handful of bad credit situations that's leading me to say that we have a systemic issue around the corner.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, lenders make mistakes. There is fraud in markets. And that's something that as lenders we all have to try to protect against. But we should not be fooled by the fact that this is a very robust credit environment. Credit spreads are tight. And when we do have a cycle, which probably will come when there's an economic slowdown, there will be losses, and we'll feel that across the economy.
Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon speaking exclusively with Bloomberg's Jumana Basecci at the Future Investment Initiative in Riyadh. So Wall Street appears to be shrugging off credit worries with these comments from the Goldman Sachs chief downplaying the risk of a credit crisis. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg senior FX and rates reporter Ruth Carson. Ruth, how are investors reacting to these comments? Are they appropriately priced for potential risks?
Absolutely. And I think the way to answer it would be there is debate raging on exactly where we are in the credit cycle. So absolutely, you've got top executives from Goldman, Standard Chartered, Citibank, all weighing in on where we are exactly, whether there are systemic risks in credit markets right now, and that could spill over to the global financial system. Now, there are obviously multiple people on both sides of the camp here, but one thing for sure, volatility is certainly picking up, and there is increased attentions into this space as investors position for potential fallouts here.
So, Ruth, should the credit crisis worsen or more high-profile blow-ups occur, what are some of the go-to havens that investors can turn to?
Great question. As we saw when the headlines around Tricolor, First Brands came out, the effect wasn't just contained within the corporate bond space. It spilled over to treasuries, to the macro trading community. So when we think about havens and how investors could react, should there be further volatility, obviously the yen is one potential haven at 153 per dollar or so. That's looking very cheap. Treasuries also a go-to haven. And not to forget, if we look at the Bloomberg spot index, dollar spot index, it's down 8% this year alone. So things are looking cheap even on the greenback. So there could be some haven flows there.
Ruth, the other thing we're watching in markets, it's how well these AI stocks have done. It's turning into a macro theme. What are traders watching?
Absolutely. I mean, look, this week is a blockbuster week for traders, regardless if you're equities, credit or macro. And we've got 5 of the biggest tech companies' earnings out this week alone. So watch this space. It will definitely have an impact on sentiment globally. And I think that's the thing to watch for, definitely among macro traders in particular, who are the ones that I speak with. You know, what does this mean for treasuries? What does this mean for the yen? What does this mean for the dollar? So definitely watch this space, the tech earnings will hold a lot of sway.
I'm glad you raised yen because this week we have BOJ and we're seeing, verbal intervention from policymakers. But I think the risk for Ueda-san is whether we get another yen carry trade unwind from the likes of August, right? So he's been cautious to avoid that. What are we expecting in terms of commentary from the BOJ?
Yeah, look, again, all the traders are having their eyes peeled on our screens, listening to every word that comes out, both from the BOJ's perspective as well as the finance minister, the new finance minister and authorities in Japan. It will all come down to, particularly on the BOJ signalling, where is the BOJ's rate hiking cycle at? Where, rates are headed in Japan, and that would definitely impact how yen is going to be traded going forward. It is cheap at the moment. Euro yen is expensive. You look at dollar yen as well. The yen is certainly weak. So if there are any surprises, particularly hawkish surprises, you will see the yen getting some bit there.
What does this also tell us about JGB expectations? I mean, something that's come out of Trump being in Japan, these indications of expansionary policy. So what are we expecting in terms of JGBs? Just very quickly if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, very much an anchor to the rates world. For so long, it did nothing. So there has been gradual movements there, but it is important to remember JGBs still hold the steepest yield curves in the world, in the developed market world. So yes, expansionary policies are not good for bonds, period. So in this case, JGBs, watch this space. We could see more steepening perhaps.
Ruth, always great to get your insights. Thanks so much. Bloomberg Senior FX and Rates reporter Ruth Carson. Now let's take a quick look at how we are pointing for the start of Asia trade. Of course, Australia has already gotten a head start, looking a bit tepid. But the key thing we'll be watching are these tech names, especially following SK Hynix's earnings. And don't forget, we have the Kospi topping 4K, the Nikkei topping 50K. So watching to see if the drivers continue, especially amid this US-China data and Trump continuing his tour of Asia. Markets open next in Seoul and Tokyo. This is Bloomberg. This is the Asia trade. We're counting down to Asia's major market opens. And of course, Shery, what we are watching as Trump continues his tour of Asia, how he will engage with the South Korean leader after already having quite a successful trip with the Japanese Prime Minister.
Yeah, welcome to Gyeongju, South Korea, as APEC gets underway, and we are expecting President Trump to come in today and meet with President Lee Jae-myung. We are expecting, as you said, Avril, how he engages with President Xi Jinping on that meeting on Thursday. Plenty on the agenda to discuss here at APEC. AI is taking center stage with investments, of course, that we're expecting from many companies on data centers. Nvidia also supplying chips to Korean companies as well. But yes, you said it, it's all about APEC this week.
Yeah, take a look at how we are setting up for the session, because it's not just the commentary we've gotten from Trump on this friendship with the Japanese leader. Scott Bessent is also talking about how Japan should allow the BOJ policy space, and that is key. Don't forget, a couple of months back, he did talk about the BOJ seemingly behind the curve. Think about how inflation is faring in the country. Does this ramp up external pressure on the BOJ to move on rates, as we're cognizant as well on the domestic pressures politically as well when it comes to Takeichi-san's policies? For the moment, we are seeing Japanese stocks starting the day on the front foot. Of course, we've been seeing it this week topping the 50K level. Even Bessent has been highlighting how well the stock market has been doing in the country, along with Trump saying the same as well. Besant's comments seem to be dragging dollar-yen down. And of course, with the expansionary fiscal policy, JGBs continue to come under pressure, pushing towards 165, 1653 on the 10-year. Taking a look at Korea, this is, of course, against the backdrop of the likes of JP Morgan setting sights on 5K on the Kospi, which coincidentally is Lee Jae-myung's goal as well for the South Korean benchmark. And we are unpacking still SK Hynix's earnings. We've gotten these record profits, but also think about the future demand and how we know high bandwidth memory is pretty much booked out for 2026, as our colleague Yu Kyung was highlighting earlier. And this is coming along with the Nvidia chief set to be in Korea and set to announce some of these deals, not just with Samsung, but Hyundai as well. So some of the names to watch in the session. Dollar Korea won, of course, with the investment pledge with the U.S. In scrutiny, maybe you're seeing a bit of that caution being reflected as well. SK Hynix is up almost 3%. Take a look at how Wall Street is faring. Of course, we are seeing a bit of gold pull back further from that 4K level. Brent is in the spotlight given the flare-up in the Gaza region as well. And U.S. 10-year continues to see a bit of that slippage, still below the 4% handle. Lots to unpack. Let's bring in David Chao, global market strategist at Invesco. David, good to see you. So I think the big thing for markets, at least geopolitically, I mean, there's so much to unpack here because we got Fed, we got Max 7 earnings, but the headlines that you're expecting that could shape the rest of the year in terms of, I guess the centerpiece would be what comes out of that Trump-Xi meeting.
Well, I think that it's a welcome news that Trump is in Asia and taking a much more diplomatic approach, both towards allies like Japan, but also Southeast Asian countries as well. I think that this is going to certainly bring down the geopolitical risk premium that lots of investors have been worrying about so far this year. We know that the biggest risk for markets this year have been the tariffs. I don't think that the U.S. and China, the trade relations and the trade tensions are going to completely subside, despite the framework being reached. I think that there's still going to be more complex components of the trade deal that are yet to be ironed out. But overall, a very welcomed week that we're seeing Trump being here in Asia, bringing down some of those tensions.
I think, okay, for the U.S. and China, these lingering structural disagreements, I think, is what you're alluding to. So maybe for markets, the driver is going to be more on monetary policy. But we also have that in the form of the Fed. I mean, are there any indications that there could be things that derail the Fed's rate-cutting trajectory?
Well, the Fed is being very data dependent, and the U.S. economy is quite resilient. And so I think that the Fed is very focused on the labor market and if there are going to be bigger cracks or not. So far, we've seen a bit of a soft patch in the labor market, and I don't know if that necessarily warrants, 2 or 3 rate cuts. Certainly, the disinflationary environment is headed towards the right way. But to be frank, I think that the American economy, the global economy, is becoming bifurcated towards one of the new economy that's being driven by things like the AI. Fed cuts are going to help the old economy.
Yeah, let's talk about the bifurcation because we're seeing it in the stock markets as well, right? When it comes to the levels that we're seeing right now, is AI exuberance and the tech rally more important than the Fed? Could we even say that at this point?
I think certainly the AI economy and the Mag 7 and the big cap stocks in the U.S. are very much driven by AI spending, AI investment. But, the Fed cuts are more towards the old economy or kind of small cap, mid cap stocks. Those spaces would benefit if we do see Fed rate cuts.
What parts of Asia are you looking at, given, of course, that we are watching the AI rally, but, of course, as you mentioned, a potential Fed rate cut, but other central bank decisions, including the BOJ as well?
Well, I think that Asian equities are likely to outperform developed market equities, and that's because there's a trifecta of things that are going on that's going to give a boost, I think, to risk assets in Asia. Number one, local central banks continue to be cutting rates. Even when the ECB is on hold, the Fed could be cutting. But overall, we're seeing looser monetary policy in the emerging market region. The U.S. dollar is weakening against the basket of currencies, and also oil remains under $80 a barrel. These are the trifecta of reasons why I think that emerging markets could outperform developed markets or U.S. equities in the coming 12 months.
David, I like the distinction you're making between old and new economy. And I guess as we see the Japanese benchmark topping 50K, Kospi above 4, where does this leave the rest of Asia?
Well, we have something called FOMO, fear of missing out for investors when it comes to being left out the AI run. Well, I think that there's something called FOBO for countries, for governments, or fear of being obsolete in a way. So there's certainly countries that are on the forefront of AI, especially the Northeast Asian countries. But they're also, and I think that the capital is going to continue to be directed toward those respective economies and to those respective sectors. So it's really up to the other economies around Southeast Asia, around the APEC region, as to how they position themselves for the new economy.
David Chao, always good to have you with us, global market strategist at Invesco. Now, President Trump coming here to South Korea. He will be addressing the APEC CEO Summit in Gyeongju. The China show anchor, Yvonne Man, is also here with me at the summit. Did you expect it to be this cold?
I came prepared. I heard it was going to be single digits, which is very different from Hong Kong weather. So I brought my big coat this morning.
Every time in South Korea, especially given that although cold, we are expecting the agenda to be pretty hot.
And I think hopefully at least cool down the temperature when it comes to tensions. Okay, we're talking about temperatures here. But yes, we talk about APEC, and things are really underway now. We're expecting to hear from President Trump. He's expecting to take and step foot here in South Korea in just a few minutes or next hour or so. So the opening ceremonies are underway, and of course, the key meeting today really is with President Trump, and as well as President Lee of South Korea, because there's still a lot of ironing out of the trade deal that they need to do.
It was really interesting when I spoke to President Lee last week, how he said the major key issues are still to be discussed at this point. Take a listen first.
The method of investment, the amount of investment, the timeline, and how we will share the losses and divide the dividends, all of these remain sticking points. The U.S. will, of course, try to maximize its interests, but it must not be to the extent that causes catastrophic consequences for South Korea.
It's a difficult setup for Lee Jae-myung, given that President Trump seemed to have such a great time in Japan.
Oh, yeah, with the new prime minister seemingly willing, able to charm the president here with, getting a bit more details on some of the projects that they talked about in their trade deal as well, especially when it came to Japanese automakers, right? They were able to cap that levy at 15%. So if we don't get a trade deal with Korea, between the U.S., when it comes to Korean automakers, they're going to be left with a disadvantage there, and Korea might be left as seen as a bit more of a reluctant ally, too.
Yeah, already reeling from the 25% tariffs that haven't come down, despite the fact that back in July we said we had a deal, but in fact, we are not seeing anything concrete as of yet, right? However, are we seeing a little bit more optimism on perhaps the low-hanging fruits and the results that we could get from President Trump and President Xi Jinping?
Well, we'll see, right? It seems like ASEAN and what we got there was quite optimistic. We'll see if those good vibes continue. But I love how our BN colleagues phrased it. The meeting between Lee and Trump is going to be the appetizer here at APEC. The big main course is going to be the meetings between Xi and Trump later on this week as well, because there's still a lot that we need to get to know and really finalize here. What was discussed in Malaysia, right? When it came to fentanyl, when it came to shipping levies, when it came to even just export curbs, are both sides going to relax those restrictions when it came to critical minerals as well as software? That is really going to be the key thing we need to learn more at APEC here.
And so consequential really for the global economy, especially given how rare earths are in all of these electronics, EVs, batteries. Really, you can't talk about the global economy without talking about these critical minerals. what are we expecting to see perhaps in the timeline? We don't even know at this point where exactly this summit could be.
Yes, we're still kind of scrambling with our plans of where these talks are going to be. Of course, we're going to be following where those talks are going to be all around Korea. But it's interesting, right? Because I think what we got from Malaysia was good. It was good for markets. What we need is further confirmation, right? And whether there will actually be some sort of signed agreement on paper, because that's what the investors are looking for right now. Actual commitments. How many soybeans is China going to be buying as well? In terms of the export curbs, the U.S. seems to suggest that China is willing to defer those critical minerals export bans, or I should say curbs, by a year. But China, the readouts that we saw in Malaysia were actually quite vague when it came to some of those clear indications. So we're looking for timelines, we're looking for numbers, whether it's soybeans, Boeing planes even we're expected here. But yes, at least for now, we're hoping that tariffs are off the table, as well as a trade truce, that 90-day trade truce between U.S. and China could be extended.
And the geopolitical backdrop is still difficult, right? With President Trump saying that even Taiwan would be discussed at a time when we also have concerns and questions about a potential peace deal that they said would be on the agenda, but we still have no clarity on those issues yet.
Yeah, when it came to the defense side of things, I think that's still the big question mark of whether, obviously Trump, Xi would like to bring in the Taiwan issue to these discussions. We'll see what Trump decides, because it seems like, when it came to Taiwan, Trump has always been quite transactional, too, when it comes to that economy. So certainly there is going to be a lot of questions on whether it will be discussed, how in the priority list. Also when it came to North Korea, right? I mean, obviously we're wondering if Kim Jong-un is going to be having a meeting with Trump. Is Trump going to take it, right? And our plans are going to shift all over the place now for the weekend.
President Trump saying exactly. President Trump saying he was open to the meeting, and now saying he would love to meet Kim Jong-un. So yes, we're all watching to figure out what the agenda looks like in the next couple of days. Our co-anchor of the China show, Yvonne Man, at the APEC CEO Summit here in Gyeongju, South Korea. We have plenty more to come on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Let's take a look at some of the stocks in focus today. Of course, it is SK Hynix, Samsung, Hyundai as well. We've got an indication that these will be the bunch of companies that will be cooperating with the likes of Nvidia. Of course, Jensen Huang has talked about how we're not in any AI bubble, and we also keeping sights on the broader benchmark as well. Kospi topping 4K. We have the likes of JP Morgan talking about buying the dip, and that 5K is really the target when it comes to the broader benchmark. And of course, we are watching how investors are receiving SK Hynix's earnings after it reported that 62% jump in third quarter profit. The global AI infrastructure build out, ratcheting up chip prices, demand as well. Let's bring in Asia Stocks reporter Yu Kyung Lee for us. Yu Kyung, we talked a bit earlier about how this looks like a good scorecard and future demand also looks solid. We're since hearing that it sees SK Hynix sees 2026 capex to be above the 2025 level. What does this tell us about the strategy for the company and allaying concerns even further about AI demand?
Sure. So I think the latest result, the third quarterly result from SK Hynix defies a lot of the doubts that have been in the market. So there have been some optimism building up toward today that SK Hynix would probably report operating profits that's higher than the market consensus. And indeed, it did beat the market consensus. And also, it was a record quarterly profit. So, and not only that, I think what's most surprising and probably most positive to the SK Hynix shareholder was that the company said its chip lineup for 2026 has already been sold out because of this robust demand for AI chips coming from global companies just hoovering up every single chip that's possible. So in addition to this, with Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang said we're not in an AI bubble. And I think this is a really great day for SK Hynix shareholders. So the earnings conference call is right now underway. And I think some might question, try to gauge the outlook for the AI demand beyond 2026. We might be too early to do that, but that's I think the outlook going forward could be coming into question.
Yu Kyung, this is coming against the backdrop of reports that, this price war is emerging. Samsung might be cutting prices for one of its products by as much as 30%. What is that going to mean for SK Hynix?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yesterday we saw SK Hynix shares slipping a lot after Samsung Electronics, which is its key rival for HBM chips that's crucial for the AI accelerators like the OpenAI's ChatGPT, that Samsung is cutting its chip prices in order to expand its market share. This is type of a strategy that's often adopted by the underdog or the company that's trying to catch up with a bigger rival. So that news actually sent the shares of SK Hynix lower yesterday, but after hearing that SK Hynix already has sold out its chip lineup for 2026, I think investors are just brushing off that report, and I think Samsung might have to. Samsung might be facing questions from investors. What's its deal with 2026 with clients? How much chips they have sold to clients for 2026? So these kind of questions will be faced by Samsung, and SK Hynix shares trading near its record close this morning show clearly that investors are enjoying the AI party today.
And among those investors, we have the likes of JP Morgan, right? They're lifting the Kospi target to 5K, and their most preferred stocks include Samsung, SK, Hanwha, Aerospace. What does this tell us about the beneficiaries, maybe against the trade backdrop as well, and the kinds of investments that might be coming into the U.S.? What are you watching?
Yeah, so JP Morgan lifted its bull case target for Kospi to 6,000, and it has raised its base case target for Kospi to 5,000. And if you look at the Kospi this morning, it's trading above 4,000. This is the level that none of us has seen before. We never lived in a period where Kospi was trading above 4,000, and large part of that rally has been driven by the two chip makers, Samsung and SK Hynix, and especially the latter, which saw its share price triple this year alone. So it's been really difficult for mutual fund managers to outperform the benchmark without having the SK Hynix in their portfolio. So I think the more investors will try to get a share of SK Hynix or Samsung Electronics, given this bullish demand and bullish signals coming from the companies themselves for the outlook in upcoming months.
Yu Kyung, thank you so much. Bloomberg's Asia stocks reporter Yu Kyung Lee. And as Yu Kyung was just speaking, we're hearing from SK Hynix saying unlikely high bandwidth supply will catch up with demand in the short term, and that will remain tight into 2027. So lots of demand there, allaying further those AI demand concerns. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. Here are some of our top corporate stories. Bloomberg has learned that Starbucks sees Boryu Capital as the frontrunner in its search for a partner in its China business. Sources say the private equity firm is the likeliest buyer after outbidding others, including Carlyle Group. A potential deal could value Starbucks' Chinese operations at more than $4 billion. Microsoft closed higher in the U.S. after OpenAI gave its longtime backer a 27% ownership stake. It's part of a restructuring plan that clears the way for OpenAI to become a fully profit-driven business. Under the deal, Microsoft's stake in OpenAI will be worth some $135 billion, and the tech giant will have access to the startup's technology until 2032. Uber plans to build a fleet of 100,000 autonomous vehicles powered by Nvidia technology. Nvidia says the companies expect the expansion to start in 2027. The ambitious move could help bring down the cost of offering hailable robo-taxis to consumers. Stellantis will be among the first automakers to deliver Nvidia-powered robo-taxis to Uber. Now let's take a look at how the benchmarks are faring. Of course, this is following on from Trump's tour of Asia as he's whipped through Malaysia, Japan, now South Korea in the spotlight. And among the key sticking points, how will they implement or even get details of that $350 billion investment pledge? For the moment, though, we are seeing Japanese, South Korean stocks tracking their Wall Street counterparts. It's really a tech game, and not just SK Hynix's earnings. Think about Advantis as well, 16% up after a very positive set of numbers. But as I said, focus on Korea. Shery?
Right, Avril, take a look at live pictures out of Japan right now. That's Haneda Airport, and you're watching Marine One just land. We know that President Trump is just finishing up his visit to Japan. He hailed the U.S. alliance with Japan and praised the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi on her plans to increase defense spending. Both leaders signed documents on trade and critical minerals, but the agreements remain still ill-defined. The trade document noting swift and continued efforts. The Critical Minerals Pact pledging to coordinate on permitting, financing, and mapping. Still, enough to say that they had a very good meeting and set a very high bar for when President Trump actually comes to South Korea. We are expecting him to come to Gyeongju to meet with President Lee Jae-myung this morning, just in a couple of hours. So, Avril, the stakes very high at a time when we've heard directly from President Lee Jae-myung that there are still major sticking points in finalizing that trade deal at a time when Korean automakers face 25% tariffs, while Japanese car makers are facing 15%. So you can see how desperate the situation must be for Seoul.
Yeah, and I think it's worth juxtaposing this against what we got from the U.S. and Japan meetings, because we are getting further details, right, of their $550 billion investment pledge. The likes of Akazawa saying that for now, these contours from the firms that will be investing into the U.S. could total as much as $400 billion. We know some of the big names that could be involved, including SoftBank and Toshiba. And in terms of the sectors, it's also energy, AI, critical minerals. As we know, rare earths has been something the Chinese have used as leverage in this trade war with the U.S. And the U.S. tour, Trump's tour throughout Asia, you notice that he has been trying to secure the rare earth supply chain with these commitments with not just Japan, but with the likes of the Malaysians, the Thais as well. So we'll be watching these developments as they unfold. This is Bloomberg.
We take you live to Japan as we are awaiting President Trump to depart Tokyo in order to come to here Gyeongju in South Korea, where the APEC Summit is getting underway. We are expecting President Trump to meet with President Lee Jae-myung in just a couple of hours. This after a successful visit to Japan, where he praised the new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. We know that the president does have a more contentious trade deal to finalize with South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung saying that the major contentious points on the $350 billion funds are still being discussed. We are also going to get President Trump giving a speech today, and also we're expecting a lunch with CEOs.
Yeah, and of course, this is Trump as we await his arrival in South Korea, and how he has sort of brought along with him some of these private sector chiefs, right? So watching to see how that plays out at the CEO summit there. As you can see, some of these leaders streaming into the event with Trump set to leave Japan and arrive in South Korea for the meeting. And of course, the centerpiece, I think, for his trip in South Korea is going to be that meeting with the Chinese president. Now, for the moment, we are seeing Air Force One on the tarmac and waiting to see the arrival of the U.S. president. Shery?
Avril, let's bring in our next guest, Darcie Draudt-Véjares. She's a Korean Studies Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Darcie, great to have you with us. How significant is this APEC Summit now that we have so many different bilaterals that will really take the focus perhaps away from this multilateral setting?
Yeah, I think that that's really the story here, is just how many important bilaterals are happening at a moment of an economic cooperation summit, with all these bilaterals in a moment of economic disruption and insecurity in the region. And so we're seeing, in a sense, Trump becomes a bit of a centerpiece in what should be Korea's shining moment for putting this event together over the course of the past year.
How challenging is the situation for President Lee Jae-myung when President Trump is coming off a very successful meeting with his Japanese counterpart, and we know that that trade deal has already been finalized?
This is really the tough moment for Lee right now, particularly because the trade deals with Korea and Japan are compared so heavily in Washington right now. And seeing the level of Japan's pledges, particularly in the $550 billion commitment of investment in the United States, at a moment when Lee can't commit the same at his $350 billion commitment, that's the sticking point in what's going on right now. So obviously the comparison that's going on is putting a lot of extra pressure on Lee in going into this meeting right now.
And in terms of the comparison also, we know how Trump, for him, it's really about personal relationships. You look at how Sanae Takaichi seems to be able to establish one, following on from her, relationship, or Abe's relationship with Trump. So when it comes to Lee Jae-myung, what do you think needs to be done to sort of establish a sort of rapport? And thus, what we're seeing in the U.S. in terms of immigration and that being a sticking point following the ICE raids, how much of that is an added layer of complication for Lee Jae-myung?
Yeah, this is again a place where the comparison between Japan and Korea are not really working in Lee's favor. So obviously, the current prime minister of Japan has a legacy with Shinzo Abe, who had a really great relationship with President Trump. That was able to kind of vouch for her going into her meeting with Trump a couple days ago. By comparison, Lee comes in as sort of a political outsider in the Korean establishment anyway. The one thing I will say is that we can look to the August summit when President Lee visited Washington, and he and Trump had a fairly genial meeting at the White House. In fact, I was at an event where President Lee spoke right after that summit, and there was a sort of collective sigh of relief that President Lee was able to sit next to President Trump and have a comfortable conversation. But as you pointed out, that was actually before the LG Hyundai Meta plant raid in Georgia, which derailed a lot of the feeling of momentum, the positive feelings in particularly in the trade, investment, and industrial cooperation relationship between the two countries. So this is continuing to be a sticking point in South Korea, where there's been a lot of backlash and concern over the feelings of unfairness in asking this close ally to invest so heavily in its partner, the United States, and then have this widespread immigration crackdown on its nationals. So that feeling of national shame is really still permeating a lot of the ways that South Koreans, negotiators, as well as the public, are viewing how this is going to happen going forward with the economic deal. So right now, what we're seeing is, how does Trump's visit with Lee when he visited Washington in August, how is that going to compare to now? There's a lot of areas that need to be reset in order to get that goodwill back on track.
With that in mind, what would you say Lee Jae-myung is going to be able realistically to achieve, and what would count as success, given maybe we won't see further details on the investment pledge?
Yeah, I think right now it's very realistic to say that there's not going to be a trade deal done this week. We've heard what Trump has to say about feelings of being almost close. He said something to the effect to Air Force One reporters over the weekend. But then Lee Jae-myung has emphasized the importance of having a fair and reasonable deal between the two partners. And again, this issue of the investment commitment is the sticking point here. So I think that that's going to be something that's going to be very difficult to hammer out, certainly in the next day or two while Trump is in the country. But really going forward, it's the structure of what that investment package looks like that's going to be the sticking point going forward.
Seoul seems to have dug itself into a hole, especially after the immigration raid in Georgia of South Korean plants really increased the criticism domestically against this deal, because Japan seems to be keeping the investment fund and the wording, even this document around trade, critical minerals, pretty vague. And South Korea, on the other hand, wants to specify every single thing. How much of a problem is this?
Yeah, I think this is a really important comparison again between Korean and Japanese economies, because even though maybe on paper they look both like booming, advanced industrialized tech juggernauts, at the other hand, actually the domestic economies, the political economies are quite different. And in fact, in the in the financial services space, in the investment space, this is where there's quite a big difference. Japan has a large number of reserves that it can use to commit this level of investments. And the way that the private sector is working with the government in order to invest is quite different than the Korean case. The Korean case, the amount that's being asked to commit is quite a high portion of the reserves that the country wouldn't be able to take that level of direct, immediate cash injection into the U.S. economy. So this is something where, on the one hand, yes, you could say Korea dug itself into the hole, but at the other hand, it doesn't really have a place for it to go, simply because the structure of its economy is different.
Right. You're watching live pictures of President Trump right now at Haneda Airport. You can see him right now shaking hands. He's just wrapped up his visit to Japan, met with Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. He's now headed here to South Korea. We are expecting him to meet with President Lee Jae-myung in just a couple of hours. He's also expected to give a speech for APEC this morning at the CEO Summit. He's expected to meet with business executives right there today as well. You can see President Trump climbing aboard Air Force One as he departs Japan and heads here to Gyeongju, South Korea, for very significant meetings, not only with his South Korean counterpart, but President Xi Jinping on Thursday, of course. Darcie, when it comes to the South Korean relationship with President Trump, there's also another factor, of course, and that's North Korea and the geopolitics of the Korean Peninsula. We heard from President Trump that he would love to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. When do you expect that to happen?
I think that there was some speculation that might be happening on this visit, but from what we're hearing out of Seoul, that doesn't seem to be likely. And I think there's a lot of other factors, geopolitical factors, that are kind of counting it out, particularly because Trump is also taking a harder line stance toward Russia at a moment where North Korea is helping its efforts in Ukraine. So the stars aren't really aligned maybe for this visit. The other factor is how is South Korea going to be involved in the process of Trump meeting with the North Korea. But the one thing here that's important is that current South Korean president is from the Progressive Party, who typically favors engagement with North Korea. In fact, that's under a progressive president is the conditions under which Trump made his first historic visit with Kim Jong-un and crossing the DMZ. So there are some factors that will help it align, but right now it seems that there's not a lot of momentum right now. At the same time, it's no secret that Trump sees the Korean Peninsula as one of its items on its peacemaking to-do list. So it's definitely on the agenda, maybe not for this trip, but for his next trip to the region.
Darcie, thank you so much for your insights.
Really
good to chat with you, Darcie.
Carnegie Endowment.
Happy to.
Now, Shery, let's also take a look at what we're seeing in Australian assets. In the past couple of minutes, we've gotten Australia's CPI numbers, which for the third quarter beat estimates, and this was fueled by housing prices. And these housing costs are rising at their fastest pace since 2022. So this is giving fresh legs to the Aussie dollar rally that, of course, this week has been benefiting as a currency that is tied to risk. And amid the US-China trade data on, we're seeing that climb in Aussie against the greenback. But this also comes against a backdrop of these data sets from Australia, and perhaps that pushes the RBA cut to next year. And as we saw Australia's benchmark starting the day on the back foot, we're sinking a little bit further now when it comes to stocks, and even on the 10-year, seeing a bit of selling there, almost 5 basis points on the 10-year yield. Shery?
I mean, Avril, we have such a busy and heavy APEC agenda that I'm starting to forget that there's tons of monetary policy decisions this week as well. But take a look right now at Air Force One as we're awaiting President Trump to depart Japan and head over here to Gyeongju, South Korea, where he'll be meeting with President Lee Jae-myung and also President Xi Jinping. And you can see on the right side right there, the SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won. We are expecting to see the CEO Summit now kicking off and President Trump giving a speech also around noon after his conversations with the South Korean president. Remember, hundreds of business leaders are here in Gyeongju, including Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang, Citigroup's Jane Fraser, JD.com Sandy Xu, Naver Corp CEO Soon-Yeon Chul. Heads of states, of course, are here, so no wonder the security is so tight around the whole city. More than 18,000 police officers, SWAT units, Coast Guard personnel have been deployed. We'll stay here in Gyeongju, APEC, and bring you the latest. More ahead. This is Bloomberg.
You're watching the Asia Trade. Now, China has pledged to significantly boost domestic consumption over the next 5 years while keeping tech and manufacturing as top priorities. The move aims to reduce reliance on exports after trade tensions escalated sharply this year. Let's bring in our China correspondent, Mimin Lo, in Hong Kong for us. So, Mimin, what measures is the government taking to boost consumption?
Yeah, it's a key priority, and President Xi said that China needs to speed up the development of a strong domestic economy to counter those external uncertainties. And among the measures to boost consumption include, for example, improving people's livelihoods, more spending on public welfare, improving those income distribution. And here you can see on the chart that China's share of GDP when it comes to consumption is just about 40%, which is far below the global average of about 56%. So still a long way to go. Some of the other measures include tackling the intense price competition, the anti-involution campaign, the government pledging to promote healthy competition that is based on quality rather than prices, also promoting investments as a means to drive growth, especially to construct some iconic infrastructure that could, create demand for construction material, create jobs as well. So this is a big theme this year for at least for the next 5 years for China as it tries to come up with another engine for growth, even as exports so far has been pretty resilient. But the big question is whether that will be sustainable as a long-term driver of growth given the U.S.-China trade war now.
Yeah, and given that trade war, of course, tech self-reliance also remaining a key priority for the government.
That's right. So tech self-reliance is still the #1 priority, and it's coming in the context of this tech race heating up, right? President Trump arriving in South Korea shortly, seeking to sign a deal around tech to collaborate in areas like AI and so on. And China also wanting to ramp up its own investments to seek breakthroughs in disruptive technology, especially in core areas like chips, like advanced industrial equipments, also some of the emerging pillars like new materials, new energy, 6G mobile technology here. And you can see on this chart as well that markets have been liking what they are seeing in terms of the direction for the next 5 years. But the detail still is a little bit lacking in terms of how the government will go about pursuing some of these measures and how strongly the government is going to enforce it and implement it at the local level. So a lot still to come, and this is something that we'll keep watching. And of course, that U.S.-China trade talk on Thursday, that will have a great impact on market sentiment and also, I guess, on consumption sentiment as well.
I'll be watching as well. Mimin, thank you so much. Bloomberg's China correspondent Mimin Lo for us there. Now, there are a couple of themes, as Mimin was just highlighting, when it comes to tech self-reliance. So you're really seeing the undercurrent in other economies as well, including in Japan. So what does this mean for chip-related stocks, including the likes of Advantis, which posted a really solid set of numbers just a day ago? For the moment, surge of as much as 16% in the session. SoftBank, this is a company that has been identified as part part of those that will be investing into the U.S. as part of that $550 billion investment pledge. We're continuing to get the contours of the U.S.-Japan agreement, so keeping tabs on that. And the tackle, or rather the Trump trade, Kawasaki heavy among the stocks that are in focus. Nidec, of course, because of the accounting troubles that led to a steep decline, and it's been taken off the Nikkei. Today, it's extending losses as well. So keeping tabs on these Japanese movers, even as we watch for what's going on in South Korea.
You know what's going on in South Korea right now, the APEC CEO Summit, and we do have South Korean President Lee Jae-myung speaking right now. And of course, this is very high stakes for the South Korean leader, right? I mean, this was an event that was secured by the previous Yoon Suk-yeol government that was ousted, and he's had to prepare for the last few months. We have talked about the significant challenges when it comes to this city. As culturally significant as Gyeongju is with its UNESCO sites, we have seen the lack of hotel rooms, for example, one of the key issues here as thousands of people gather in this city in South Korea, only 2 hours by train away in Seoul, that have to be overcome in order to host hundreds of business leaders at this APEC CEO Summit. We have the likes of the heads of Nvidia, Citigroup, JD.com, Naver as well. We are expecting the APEC Leaders Summit as well over Friday and Saturday, and the bilateral conversations during these events will be key. President Lee Jae-myung is going to speak with President Trump this morning. President Trump does have a lunch with CEOs today as well. President Lee will be hosting President Trump for a dinner expected tonight. We're expecting President Trump also to speak, of course, with President Xi Jinping with key outstanding issues in the bilateral relationship, including export controls and purchasing agreements as well. We have more ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg. The APEC CEO Summit getting underway with President Lee Jae-myung delivering remarks. We do have the likes of Nvidia's head, JD.com, as well as Naver and Citigroup all present as hundreds of global business leaders gather in this city. Of course, what we're watching is for a Gyeongju declaration reaffirming support for free trade in a joint statement. Earlier, we spoke to the executive director of the APEC Secretariat, Eduardo Pedrosa, and asked him about the relevance of these kinds of multilateral gatherings.
Well, the first is that these groups provide a platform for the bilateral deals to actually take place. As you've mentioned, President Xi and President Trump have been supposed to meet all year long. Finally, it's come right here in Gyeongju at an APEC meeting.
Do you expect something significant to come out from these bilaterals?
Well, we hope so. The recent ASEAN meetings came up with some very successful deals, so hopefully we'll see some here as well.
You noted earlier this year that the trade rule book is actually dated, but what sort of consensus can we expect, especially when you have this setting, multilateral, where so many countries are involved in trying to get their say in whatever comes out?
Well, one of the problems with the rule book is it just hasn't moved on since the 1990s. So what we can do here is to sort of take an incubator approach to think through what do we need to do in this ever-changing world, especially with new technologies like artificial intelligence. So that's what we're looking to be delivered here in these meetings.
What the United States and many other countries want vis-a-vis China, for example, is a fair playing ground, right? When it comes to setting the agenda for APEC 2026, if we do not get some significant progress out of these conversations between the U.S. and China, could that have a meaningful impact on how all of these other countries interact as well?
I think we're just going to keep our eyes on the future. There may be difficulties and bumps along the road, but APEC's very much a forward-looking organization. So we'll take what we can, think through cooperation and where common ground is. And that's very much the APEC way.
And it's very important for the private sector to actually have a say in how you shape up the framework of what the economic future should look like, right? At the APEC CEO Summit, what are you expecting business leaders to focus on?
I think businesses today are looking for a certain amount of certainty about the environment in which they're operating. Investments have been in a way held off. We're seeing volatility, we're seeing uncertainty. But one of the things groups like APEC can do is try to unbundle some of the complexity. As we've said earlier, trade deals are on the road, so these deals help to navigate our way through this environment.
You mentioned other sectors such as artificial intelligence as also a core focus of these conversations. We have seen an incredible rally on anything AI related. Right. What sort of discussions can we expect at APEC that could help shape the future of how this technology evolves?
Well, APEC it's not a rule-making body, but the way we look at it is, as a way for us to move forward and bring benefits to our people. So that's really something that APEC takes very differently from other organizations. It's, how do we innovate? How do we create an environment which leads to better innovations and facilitates the development of technologies that are better in sectors like health, like education, and so on.